Distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and privilege for me to be an integral part of this evening. As Satyamurthy has mentioned, it is our 8th year of our operation. Every year we have a continuing update of our knowledge base, getting to know every one of you and build this partnership between these two blocks, which is interesting and evolving to be a fine combination. Today morning I was in Bloomberg. There were some interesting and exciting questions put across, which was worth sharing with you all. On account of the default of a Portugal bank, the financial markets were tumbling yesterday. The question remains, is the world at large is recovering? Is the crisis over? Is the financial economies are converting as real? Is re-regulations pronounced by the G20 are all effectively setting a pace for global growth? And again, what has been the sustainability of the overall economic momentum in the globe? These were some of the interesting questions set in, and I thought that's precisely summing it up, the topic which we set in, New World Order and Opportunities. If you look at a global space in the last 6 years, it's not confined to Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns. Financial economies are still reeling under pressure. Ever since Lehman Brothers collapsed, you have seen the changes. G7 has become G8, G8 become G20. Capitalism is altering its form and substance. Communism is getting redefined. Mixed economies are changing their scope and performance. Financial economies, when they realized the crisis is not confined to one single country, one single continent, one single institution, or one single sector. Individuals or institutions, countries or continents who are lived beyond their means have paid a heavy price. The world at large is setting a new momentum, ensuring consumers get protected, ensuring capital contribution comes from the public side, government side, and again, making sure interbank transactions are protected. Light switch regulation has failed. The auditors have failed. Rating agencies have failed. And the world at large has realized there has to be a huge transformation, and convergence of politics and economics has to be redefined. That's precisely what we are witnessing today. Having said that, these changes are still at a policy level. What has changed is liquidity. Trillions of dollars have been pumped as a money supply chain. Printing money, improving the liquidity has inflated the stock market. Liquidity has moved across the globe, transcending borders. It has ignited the world at large. Stock markets were bubbling. We also have realized liquidity crisis has moved into a funding crisis. Funding crisis has become a solvency crisis and essentially ending up with sovereign crisis. Today's case study of a bank, largest bank in Portugal, coming into default, signaling even after 6 years we haven't executed the policy making to professional perfection. That's what we draw. The issue remains, G20 has set in committed values, set of principles which are converging with sustainable framework of the global growth. When Americans have pronounced quantitative easing, questioning the wisdom of money supply, everyone was worried about the scale and magnitude it can inflate the financial markets. It didn't end at Federal Reserve alone. We had European Central Bank. As a design, the monetary policy was centralized, while decentralization in terms of fiscal prudence. Fiscal union or political union or banking union is evolving, and you have seen the deformity in substance. They printed money again. China kept the parity linked dollar as a currency mechanism which is not freely administered till 2008, when they started delinking without recognizing the changing market dynamics. Americans were questioning the wisdom of Chinese currency. Essentially, currency manipulation has taken place world over. Trillions of dollars have been pumped by Americans. Trillions of euros were printed in euro. Currency as a barometer lost its real rhythm. Open market operations by a Japanese monetary authority has triggered inflation, weakening the currency, inflating the market momentum, ensuring export mechanism takes its redesign was the spell. And again, world at large has seen the currency manipulation. Currency war has created trade war. These are some of the reflections which we are seeing today. We don't know the potential impact if we start unwinding these tools. Last year was a classic reflection when US tapering was pronounced. Emerging markets, not only stock market, currency markets were decelerating. Reflection is there globally. We live in an interconnected, interdependent world. IMF, in its own wisdom, setting global prediction for global growth, looking at the overall underlying fundamentals. Global growth was said to be recovering last year, October, between 3.6 to 3.9%. Advanced economies were supposed to be performing not less than 2.2 to 2.5%. Those equations were redefined again in the spring meeting, as good as in April this year in Washington. We have seen those predictions are downward revised again. For America, is no more of 2.8%, which was originally pronounced in April. Now we are talking about 2% growth in America. There were symptoms of positive reflection. Job creation has been encouraging. As good as last week, they generated for the last quarter 288,000 jobs. Inflation yet to take its own fiscal norms. Clearly, we have seen development expenditure is not coming up between politicians. Government has to drive the change by committed expenditure. Austerity alone cannot drive the change. Value creation and austerity are mutually exclusive. We have seen the reflection in Europe. But for UK, no other country, again, UK is not stemming out of austerity alone. It has got a huge inward investments because of the geopolitical changes. Those investments have given impetus for economic momentum. Emerging markets, they have their own story to tell. They live in an interconnected, interdependent world, as I said, and currency depreciation, and again, fiscal consolidation is a major challenge. Inflation outweighs the growth. Stagflation was a reflection. That's what we have seen in the emerging markets, but for China. China is slowing down. This is the world we're in. Financial markets are tumbling still. Looking at the scale of the operation, currency mechanism, when it gets neutralized, financial markets are anyone's gambling ground. That's the reflection we have seen in most of the global map. Financial economies are still under pressure. I thought it's appropriate for me to sit you in by showing some video clips showcasing the changes which are taking place in the world, and then draw conclusions. If this is the world we are in, where do we create opportunities? How do we ensure we eradicate extreme poverty? How do we ensure we bring in gender equality? How do we ensure environment sustainability comes in? How we are going to make sure food security is coming up? These are some of the interesting and exciting challenges we have. But we also have to recognize every crisis has always given us opportunities. The world at large has changed now. We have seen the reflection in terms of ethical and moral framework. Financial economies, when they are converting as real, they are redefining their scope and performance. Essentially, the changes which we are witnessing today by Financial Stability Board globally has been a good response. We become more committed. Financial service, which was distrusted 8 years before, now coming to terms with a different spell, back to basics. That's the reflection of the theme. We are building new partnership. We recognize the changes which are taking place in the political scene. America, as the single largest economic power, is setting new momentum in the Asia-Pacific region. China, as an emerging economic power in the global governance, has its new say. Their ambitions are getting redefined. Russia, as a federation, has its own value streaming by encroaching Crimea. All sort of geopolitical makeups are getting redefined. Where I come from, 45% of the world oil, 20-25% of the world gas, Middle East and Gulf states, geopolitical makeup is enlarging day by day. Arab Spring has become Arab Summer. We have seen the reflection. Freedom, social justice, democracy are all subject to a number of questions. World at large is getting reset. But there are opportunities. There are new momentum. That's what we need to build. That's the partnership we need to develop. That's the purpose of the session. Let me run through some of the video clips which might be useful to you. Can I have the remote, please? This is the concept, New World Order and Opportunities. In the last 6 or 7 years, in very many defining moments, I had the opportunity to interact with various financial media. I brought some of the clips which could be useful. Can you move on? Global transformation is what we are seeing today. The changes which we are seeing in the financial service are integral. Gulf economies are financially stable and functional. And again, the purpose is to build a partnership with Singaporean corporates, Singaporean financial institutions, and let's look at the opportunities in total terms. Is it working? Move on. Go back to this. Yes. Plate. Yes. Can I? And now it's on. Recap of the global financial crisis. Let's see what happened.
1 year ago, the catastrophic day that changed economic history. The collapse of one of the world's oldest investment banks caused a financial panic throughout the world. Have lessons been learned? Are we on the road to recovery? And could this happen again? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm Shiri Ghosh. Thanks for being with us. The sudden and shocking collapse of Lehman Brothers, one of the most well-known financial institutions in the world, marked a seminal moment in economic history. It marked a dramatic meltdown across the globe, resulting in a credit crisis which has impacted on all of us. But in reality, it began a year before that, with warnings in 2007 over US banks' subprime liabilities, when bad debts began to outnumber their assets. And as banks realised they couldn't recoup on their losses, the panic started to spread. Let's take a look at some key moments in an economic year of hell. In September 2008, two major events happened. The government took over mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Shortly after, the investment bank Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. A month later, Iceland collapsed in dramatic fashion, taking with it investments from across Europe. During November, all countries in the Eurozone officially hit recession, as did Japan, the world's second biggest economy. In December, the US was officially declared to be in recession, though analysts acknowledged it had really begun a year previously. And in early 2009, the UK joined the list of economies in decline. Now, there are signs of some recovery. In the US, a Federal Reserve survey says economic activity is stabilising or improving in the majority of the country. France and Germany are officially out of recession.
This is what the essence. We were trying to, question our wisdom, whether the world at large is recovering. There were three panelists, including me, and being a practitioner as a banker, I was very skeptical, and I was telling nothing has changed. Two of the other speakers, one from US, one from other from UK, both asset management experts, were differing with my opinion. But even after 6 years, we have issues to retrospect. Let's look at some of the other clips which are worth looking at. It's not only Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns. A person like Bernie Madoff has defrauded $50 billion. Pension funds. Again, NGOs are paying a heavy price. Billionaires have become millionaires. And again, millionaires' trusted savings are all being wiped out. World over, we have recognized financial institutions were taken for granted. And that's the story of Madoff.
The news spread fast and quickly engendered panic amongst investors who gathered at the offices of their alleged swindler. Bernard Madoff was a Wall Street legend and pulled in big clients with big checkbooks.
They invested their money with Madoff, in some cases all of their money, tens of millions of dollars, which apparently he was taking, purporting to be getting 10, 15% returns on their money, when in fact he had lost all of it and was just continuing in a pyramid fashion to get more investors' money and pretending to pay off the old people with new people's money. And now $50 billion in assets are wiped out, gone.
His credentials seemed impeccable, a former chair of the Nasdaq, but a man who prosecutors claim used his cloak of professionalism to commit fraud on a massive scale. Madoff is alleged to have duped investors out of a staggering $50 billion in what could turn out to be the largest ever swindle by one individual. When tackled about his activities, the 70-year-old is said to have admitted his operation was just one big lie.
It is of epic proportions. The folks that have contacted us are so profoundly invested in these funds that it'll alter their lives pretty much forever, and we are doing everything we can to behave as quickly as we can in seeking recovery of those assets.
It's claimed he tricked his clients with a so-called Ponzi scheme. Investors are offered abnormally high short-term returns, but their payouts come from money put in by new investors rather than any real profits generated. Such operations often collapse or are exposed before huge fraud takes place. Not this time, it seems. It's thought some of America's wealthiest socialites are now facing ruin, especially those who'd been tied to the financial power broker for years. Lawsuits are destined to clog the US courts for years. Madoff was released on $10 million bail after being charged with securities fraud. If found guilty, he could face 20 years in jail. Michelle Clifford, Sky News, Washington.
See, because of the financial innovation went beyond definition, we have seen products which are toxic. That's why regulators were redefining the game. Real estate was the main cause. Subprime was designed to destroy the common man. We all know deregulation has got a limit. That's why regulators today are re-regulating the framework. Many of the financial institutions all over the world were grossly undercapitalized. Today, Basel III has been set in. Capital norms have been redefined. You play with your own money. When you defeat the public trust by design, we have to pay a heavy price. We have seen reflection world over in every dimension of the financial institutions. It's wholesale. It is retail again, consumer protection, credit card. There were no limits for service charges. There were no limits for interest rates. Today, there's a debt servicing capacity of an individual is measured. Interest rates have been stipulated. What should be the percentage? There's a consumer protection mechanism put to test. Investment banks were creating casino in real response to products and services. Today, investment rules have changed. Proprietary funding has got a new alignment to protect the shareholders' value. At the same time, society at large has to be recognized. So there is a limit up to which you can use the banking norms. That's the kind of change we are seeing in terms of re-regulation. Let's go forward. Regulatory reforms are to be respected. And again, it's a public-private partnership model. When you run a financial institution, more than the shareholders' money, it's public money at stake. That's precisely the reason, whether you're a local bank or an international institution, whether you're a private bank or a public financial institutions, you are global, you are public. That's why regulators comes in perspective. Looking at the stress test, when the market deflection takes place globally, we all recognize the banks were grossly undercapitalized. Look what's happened to the stress test in 2009.
The 3-month study on the health of the nation's largest financial institutions confirmed earlier leaked reports that some U.S. banks need more capital to withstand a deeper economic downturn. Among them, Bank of America, which needs to raise $34 billion, Wells Fargo, $13.7 billion, and Citigroup, $5.5 billion. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner says the test will help bring clarity to a financial system still mired in uncertainty.
They're going to replace this deep cloud of uncertainty over the system, again, with more disclosure, with more certainty. That's going to make it easier for private capital to come into the financial system, help expand the capacity of banks to lend, help banks replace the government's investments with private capital as soon as possible.
The stress test used varying scenarios to measure the impact of a deepening recession on the nation's banks, including higher unemployment and falling home prices. Standard & Poor's analyst Stuart Plesser says the study shows the U.S. financial system, like the overall economy, is starting to improve.
I think that it's been a boost to the confidence level of the investors and perhaps the consumer public at large that the banks are okay to withstand the kind of economic pressure that they're under right now.
But some question whether the tests were rigorous enough. Jonathan Corpina at Meridian Equity Partners says the report shows many U.S. banks remain vulnerable.
I think everybody is looking for some glimmer of hope in the headlines and the news stories and the situations that come out of D.C. to make something positive at it. The fact of the matter is that we still have some substantial sized banks that need billions and billions of dollars to help them run their day-to-day operations.
Secretary Geithner was more optimistic. He says the tests reveal that not all U.S. banks are weak.
It's just the beginning, and we're going to keep working to try to make sure this financial system is in a stronger position, strong enough position, so it can provide the credit necessary for recovery.
While some analysts say it may be a challenge for some banks to raise the needed capital, Wall Street investors were more upbeat. Financial stocks surged higher in after-hours trading following the release of the report. Milar Sega, VOA News.
It's precisely the reason why today stress test is not done once a year or once in a quarter. Every month, good financial institutions is sending the stress test. What happens if the market deflects? Real estate market deflects or stock market deflects, and you have collaterals based on which you are lending money or invest money. What will be the capital adequacy in those cases? Every month, there's a concerted efforts by financial institutions. This is a good development. That's what I'm trying to articulate is the crisis has created very strong discipline to financial institutions. Again, financial reforms are getting redefined. The political makeup has to come to terms. It means ensuring public at large comes to protection.
Businesses. All this hasn't stopped the big financial firms and their lobbyists from mobilizing against change. They're doing what they always do, descending on Congress, using every bit of influence they have to maintain the status quo that has maximized their profits at the expense of American consumers. Despite the fact that recently a whole bunch of those same American consumers bailed them out as a consequence of the bad decisions that they made. And since they're worried they may not be able to kill this agency, they're trying their hardest to weaken it by asking for exemptions from this agency's rules and enforcement, by fighting to keep every gap and loophole they can find. They're very good at this because that's how business has been done in Washington for a very long time. In fact, over the last 10 years, the Chamber alone spent nearly $500 million on lobbying. $500 million. The stories we heard today, they remind us that the American people can't afford business as usual any longer. These Americans can't afford high-priced lobbyists to argue their case. They're counting on us to be their advocates, to be their voice, to restore a sense of responsibility from Wall Street to Washington. That's why we need a consumer financial protection agency that will stand up not for big banks, not for financial firms, but for hard-working Americans. That's why we need regulatory reform that will reward innovation and competition instead of shortcuts and abuses. That's why we can't let special interests win this fight. We've already seen and lived the consequences of what happens when there's too little accountability on Wall Street and too little protection for Main Street. And I will not allow this country to go back there. It is time for us to move forward. It is time for real change. And I'm confident that we're going to get it done with the help of all the people who are here today, and most importantly with the help of the American people who are going to demand a better deal from their financial services. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank
you. Wall Street to Main Street, that's the essence. Investment banks to public financial institutions. That's precisely the reason why this crisis has created opportunities. It has created more ethical and moral governance. Again, it's not confined to financial institution alone. By design, policymakers or politicians, politics and economics have to converge, and we have to live within the means. That's the reflection we have seen. You as an individual, or a country, a corporate, or continents, if they are not living within their means, there's an issue. Maastricht criteria. Maastricht Treaty was set in as convergence criteria, how gross to GDP should be the basic norm to converge, what sort of fiscal discipline is required to become an integral part of the EU. We have seen the failures. It's not confined to Portugal alone. It's Portugal, Spain. All these institutions, all these countries are facing a heavy fine. Let's look at the euro crisis for a minute. And again, he has also outlived in terms of gross to GDP. There is a definite need for a downgrading by S&P. We have seen from AAA, they came to AA+.
Covering the economy, where top officials of Standard & Poor's are defending their decision to downgrade the U.S. government's credit rating for the first time ever. They dropped it from the top-tier AAA rating one notch to AA+. Tonight, the New York Times is reporting S&P is calling the bitter standoff between President Obama and Congress over raising the debt ceiling a, quote, debacle, and warning that further downgrades may lie ahead.
We have seen US downgrade has triggered many other issues across the globe, because world over, US Treasury has been an integral part of the functional makeup of countries as well as financial institutions. And again, we need to understand how these dynamics are interconnected, interdependent. As I mentioned, currency war create trade war. That's what we have seen. By printing money, we have weakened the currency world over. And countries who have not administered the currencies are paying a heavy price. Let's look at it.
International currency wars are triggered when some of the world's most powerful economies battle to remain commercially competitive. By devaluing their currency, nations are able to benefit from lower exchange rates, thus favouring trade. If a country's currency is weak, its export prices for products such as cars, telephones or textiles are attractive on the global market. At the same time, imports become more expensive, protecting local farmers and producers from otherwise fierce competition abroad. The current battle between the American dollar, the Chinese yuan and the euro has had a knock-on effect on other countries such as the Japanese yen, the Brazilian real, the British pound and the Swiss franc. But despite the obvious advantages, currencies can't all decrease in value at the same time, and if kept too weak can become vulnerable. China, for example, could face problems such as economic overheating or speculation. Meanwhile, the US, which relies heavily on exports, could see a sharp rise in inflation. On the other hand, Europe has highly developed welfare and social benefit systems. If the euro dropped too steeply, heavily indebted members of the monetary union would be at risk and could even pull the currency down with them. As in any war, it's all about knowing where your strengths and weaknesses lie. China, which holds trillions of dollars in foreign exchange reserves, knows it would be against its interests to let the dollar's value drop too much. Perhaps then the euro is most at risk as it depends on a vast political organisation which at present seems to be struggling to defend it.
That's interesting, isn't it? But this is precisely the reason Japan has realized they need to come to terms. They invented Abenomics. Trillions of dollars were coming to open market operations by printing money. They have improved the exports. Japan is said to be improving. What happens to the emerging economies? That's where the change in market preference comes in. In global terms, over 60% of the incremental growth comes out of emerging markets. India, Russia, Brazil, China, are the economic engines of the new world order. We have seen financial stability driving the change, and globally it becomes more inclusive. Developing economies and developed economies, whether trade or investments, banking or finance, needs to come together. That's a lesson we have learned.
The OECD has voiced concerns that the slowdown in emerging economies may drag on the global recovery. In its interim economic assessment released Tuesday, the international body pointed out that a capital flight in some emerging economies is shaking global markets, and this could hurt advanced economies that sell goods and services to those markets. The report went on to say the U.S. Federal Reserve's tapering is adding fuel to the risks. The agency, however, added that growth forecasts for G7 countries, including the United States and Japan, will continue to be strong, with 2.2% growth in the first quarter and 2% in the second.
So they play a very big role. Having said that, we have to realize it's not confined to financial service alone. There are parallel systems which are driving the financial system, called shadow banking. What do we mean by shadow banking? This is what
Shadow banking is worth more than $70 trillion across the globe. It isn't just about risky investment products and lending between individuals. Shadow banking also covers loan shark operations and pawn shops, as well as what are considered more respectable activities like derivatives and securities lending. What makes them shadowy is that they operate outside the regular banking system, and that means it's often not controlled by regulators. The Financial Stability Board says shadow banking poses systemic risks to the global financial system. The prevalence of shadow banking makes it difficult for governments of countries like China and India to control their economies through tools like interest rates or money supply. Let's take a look at China, where shadow banking looms largest. It's estimated China's shadow banking sector is worth $6 trillion, about 69% of the economy. That's because saving deposit rates in China are low, and most small businesses can't get bank loans and so turn to other sources of lending. China tried to rein in wealth management products last year, resulting in the worst cash crunch in more than a decade. Rosalind Chin, Bloomberg, Hong Kong.
So, what's the reflection on the global economy or trade or investments? It's not confined to financial institution alone, as I said. You need to improve the global growth. It means you have to come to terms for improving the global trade. GDP and trade are intertwined. What's happened to the global trade? What happened to the global investments? What's happening to the global finance? Let's look at it. Right, the clips are over. This is the macroeconomic indicators, as good as the latest IMF spring meeting numbers. The bigger picture, as I said, is improving. There's no question. The reason why I was recapping the financial crisis is to recognize there are reasons to believe we can be cautiously optimistic. Things are improving globally. There are new opportunities coming up. And world output is recovering. It has moved from 2.2 a couple of years before now to 3.6 this year, and it will be moving 3.9%. Advanced economies are also moving, right from UK, US. That's what I said. As good as last month, US was revised. Why? Because of the interdependency, interconnectivity in the global development. Emerging markets are said to be performing between 4.9 to 5.3. BRIC economies are also improving. Middle East and North Africa, but for geopolitical makeup, they have a committed growth in the offing. Now, market preference has changed. Global trade has changed. If you look at the global growth, if I say it is 3.6%, ideally global trade should have been not less than 5 to 6%. But still, it's recovering. Global trade is 2.1%. If you look at the export-import breakup, both developed and developing economies only managed to record a small positive increase. Several factors were playing the reasoning for this downturn. Expectation of global trade, if you look at it, again, according to WTO, it is 4.7%, which is healthy. Developing economies are now the focus of several gathering risks, including large current account deficit. Yesterday, India has announced the new budget. It's very promising, pragmatic, but they have to fix the current account deficit. They have to improve the trade. They have to reduce the import, increase the export. They have to fix the currency mechanism to real order. They have to contain the inflation. These are the challenges. As I mentioned, geopolitical conflicts are also playing a role. What happens to the investments? Trade and investments have to come together again. According to UNECDOT, global foreign direct investments have grown last year 9%, 1.45 trillion. FDIs are flowing. And if you look at the breakup, countries like Singapore has got, let me give the breakup. It's difficult to read. $64 billion as inflow of investments. United States topping of the list, 147. China is second in the list, 127. India has procured just 28 billion. It's a huge opportunity. Now the financially stable, functional government comes in, then international investors repose confidence. Sovereign funds repose confidence. And essentially, world investment has to grow if we have to have sustainable global growth. And financial markets are, as I said, is a huge gambling ground and breaking news everywhere. And information dynamics are power, and they inflate or deflate the market in real order. Financial service itself is becoming more information-centric, not location-centric. We have seen the reflection of globalization, of consumerism, of re-regulations, and technology drives the business environment. They are no more location-centric, they are information-centric, they are no more product-centric, they are consumer-centric and transaction-centric. Mobile banking, digital advantage, huge shift between the conventional transaction-based to transaction-based processing in channels and products. And technology companies plays a big role. It is e-commerce, m-commerce, and e-banking, m-banking are driving the change. And again, if you look at the forecast, mobile device will be the world primary connection tool to the internet in 2020. That's an opportunity. Let me come to the other last part of my discussion. Gulf economies. They are very stable and functional. 1.7 trillion as a GDP, 6 states put together, 6 countries are called Gulf Cooperation countries. Oman, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. What's their numbers? Looking at the growth model, they are moving between 3.5 to 4%. Current account balance as a percentage of GDP is 18%. They generate current account surplus of over $300 billion. This is not an ordinary sum. Nowhere in the world you could see such affluence. If you look at the Singapore economy, which I'll come to it, Qatar as an economy, a small country with 2 million population, generating over 200 billion GDP, current account surplus of 54 billion. Just as good as Singapore current account surplus. It's growing at 5.9 to 7% and population of 2.2, and the percentage of current account surplus to the GDP is 25%, which is huge. That's the financial stability. These are IMF numbers. And fiscal surplus, investable surplus, is over 9.3%. Now, Singapore economy, according to IMF, is this. They generate almost $300 billion and the growth rate of 3.6 to 4%, population of 5.4 to 5.5 million, and current account surplus is over 50 billion. If you see even the economic forecast for the next year, as a percentage of GDP is 18, which is a healthy trend. How do we converge? We see Singapore as a gateway for Asia. The Gulf economies are looking at as a huge synergistic opportunity. Quite a few developments in the last 7-8 years. I'll showcase some of them. If you look at the bilateral relationship is over $60 billion. And they have signed a free trade agreement. Good initiative. Investment protection agreement. And these are all helping now if you look at the overall economic momentum in terms of trade. And Qatar plays a big role, over 10 billion. Topping in the list is UAE with 27 billion. Then comes Saudi Arabia with 17 billion. And Qatar over 10 billion. Qatar, we have very strong partnership. We were initiating the free trade agreements, and we have export of petroleum crude, petroleum products, again organic chemicals. We import civil engineering equipments, iron pipes, telecommunications, measuring instruments, refined petrol. Last year we had a privilege of having the Prime Minister of Qatar was here. There were new agreements signed, and companies like Keppel Group are doing extensive interface with various Gulf states. And again, there are growing relationship between the two. Saudi Arabia plays a big role again. As I said, 17.6 billion bilateral trade. And Saudi companies are in Singapore, and oil and gas, oil is exported, importing telecommunication equipments, measuring instruments, and again, automotive tools. Growing partnership in terms of gas transportation in Qatar, and again, building port by Singapore authorities in Doha in Saudi. UAE is a very strong relationship with Singapore, 27 billion. And a lot of UAE companies are operating here. UAE banks are here. Emirates Bank, NBD. We came in 2006, 2008. Emirates NBD has set up their operation here. FGI, First Gulf Bank from Abu Dhabi is here as well. So banks are also coming in building this block. And there are enough opportunities to realize between these two. Kuwait also plays a big role. Kuwait has got a huge sovereign funds, over 500 billion. They are building investment partnership as well between Kuwait and Singapore. We have seen Singapore sovereign funds and Kuwait sovereign funds. They are coming together, investing in CVC Capital Partners, Motor Racing, and other, Madam Tazad, among few of the investments. Oman, Simcorp plays a big role in power and water, and they are building their port. Oman Oil with oil company. Oman Sohar port seeks additional advantage through Singapore partnership. So we have a growing relationship these opportunities. World over, if you look at it, the trade is here to improve. We have seen the banking is improving. We have seen new partnership between the Middle East and the Gulf states are evolving. Change in the investment profile. Market preference is more towards Asia. The Gulf states, with their huge multi-trillion sovereign funds, they are looking at Asia as a potential market. Gulf states have got trillions of dollars of projects. Airport, seaport, road, rail. And Singaporean corporates are well known. EPC or transportation, you have huge opportunities. We call upon the Singaporean corporates to come in. Look at the list of projects just mentioned in this fiscal budget. Between 2013 to, rather 14 to 15, $485 billion worth of government expenditure has been committed, capital expenditure. And these are various projects which are listed out in various sectors. These informations are going to be available through my operations here. You can collect these informations and see how you can leverage on this. So the opportunities are endless. The opportunity is to build this partnership. Looking at the changing dynamics in the world map, here is a set of two blocks where we are coming together. We have seen the marked improvements over the last 7-8 years. FTA is not an ordinary move. We have seen investment protection agreement. In addition to FTA, we have also seen growing partnership in investments. Investment partnership because the Gulf states, with so much conserved resources in terms of oil and gas, they have huge sovereign funds in the making. Oil quoting over $100, both New Mex and WTI. Well, while the governments have been conservatively budgeting $60, $65. It's anyone's guess to see what sort of fiscal surplus, current account surplus they are going to generate. How do we synergize this? What sort of bilateral trade we can bring it together? What sort of investments we can look at it? What sort of banking we can initiate? Those are opportunities we need to conceive and execute. That's precisely the reasons why we are here today. Thank you for your attention. If there's any questions, I would like to answer. Thank you.